Greetings, disciples, women in Nebraska. My name is Grace Kozak, and I am the Associate Director for Immigrant and Refugee Response with Week of Compassion. And I'm really excited to be here with my colleague, Brian Frederick-Gray, who I will let introduce himself.
Greetings, friends. I'm Brian Frederick-Gray. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Director for Justice and Advocacy Ministries at Disciples Home Missions, where we have three intersectional justice issues that are a part of our work. Refugee and Immigration Ministries is one of them, as well as environmental justice and racial justice. So grateful to be with you all. So grateful to be having this conversation with my friend and colleague, Grace.
Yeah, and so we, Brian and I, are both really aware that this time has been one of great confusion around immigration and refugee issues. And we're really grateful that you guys have decided to take on some education on, what does it really mean to be an immigrant? What does it mean to be a refugee? And so for the next piece of time, Ryan and I will be having a conversation about that, and to hopefully shed some light for you all on, not only what does it mean to be an immigrant, be a migrant, but also what does that mean in this time, in this place, and how can we all be faithfully responding? So yeah, really just excited, again, excited to be here.
Yeah, each of us wish that we could be with you there in person for the event, but we're grateful for the gift of technology that allows us to record and share this conversation with you. We'll also be hopefully sharing our contact information with everybody there as well. That if you have questions afterwards, or if you have ideas or opportunities or other things, we'd love to hear from you, that we might be able to amplify that, share that, or speak to any further questions that folks might have after this conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I thought that I could just start us off by talking a little bit about some basic kind of definitions, because I think getting everyone on the same page is important. And before I jump into that, I want to give everyone a heads up that I can see my cat approaching me. So my cat Kevin may be making a cameo, and we're just gonna sort of power through that together. Um,
Amen. Yeah. Well, and as we're giving those caveats and behind the scenes things, Grace, I can let everybody know that they're doing lawn work at the park across the street from my house. So you might be hearing the world break in a little bit as we're having this conversation, either
Yeah.
with an appearance from Kevin or with the sounds of lawnmowers and leaf blowers from my side. And it's a helpful reminder for us that, yeah, the world is breaking in all sorts of ways around these issues with refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants and the rest. But Grace, we've thrown around some of those terms. They are frequently used interchangeably with each
Yeah.
other in ways that actually aren't so helpful. So I wonder if you could help us with some of just the basic definitions and terminology to get us started.
Absolutely. So, I think the first term that we want to really talk about is immigrant, because I think immigrant encompasses so many other categories. And so, an immigrant is really someone who comes to live permanently in another country. Um, and they may do that in a variety of ways. Like I said, that's the big umbrella category, and they may do it for a variety of reasons. Some people are leaving for economic opportunity. Some people are leaving conflict zones, war zones. Some people are working to be reunited with their family members. A lot of times, a family's immigration story can take a very long time, where one family member comes and then over the course of many years, they're working on family reunification. Some people immigrate for work. A good example is, people who sort of migrate seasonally, to do a variety of agriculture, a variety of agricultural work. So there's all different kinds of reasons why someone might become an immigrant. A couple of other terms that I think are important for us to have like a baseline knowledge of are refugee, and asylum seeker. because a lot of our ministries, I know that in Nebraska, there are many refugee resettlement agencies that support people in both of those categories, but they are distinct, and it's important to talk about that. So, a refugee can refer to a wide variety of people who have been displaced. And so, a refugee is someone who is officially recognized in that classification by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. It's a person who has a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons for their race, their religion, their nationality, perhaps their political opinion, or membership of a particular social group. Now, to get that official status from the UN's High Commission on Refugees, they have to be displaced from their country of origin and then go to another country. It's in that second country where they can get that refugee classification. And then to be sort of resettled as a refugee, they would go to a third country. So when you hear about refugees arriving in the United States, think it's important to understand that they've already undergone quite a bit of quite a long journey to make it into the United States. So many people wait for years, if not decades, in a refugee camp in that second country before they are approved to come into the third country. Not only the United States, but other countries around the world accept refugees into their country. And then there's this piece about being an asylum seeker. So, an asylum seeker and a refugee um, are in the same category in the sense that they are leaving their country for the same kinds of reasons. An asylum seeker also may be leaving their country to seek, safety because they have a well-founded fear of persecution. Again, because of their race, religion, nationality, membership of particular social group. What makes them a distinct category is that when they are leaving their country for another, they are seeking to be able to remain in that second country. And they can either, depending on, what country they're doing that at, they can do that at the border right now in the United States. If people present themselves for asylum at the US-Mexico border, for example, they are not allowed to enter into the United States to wait for their asylum hearing. But if someone is in the United States, having come here to seek asylum and they've already made it inside, they can seek asylum from within our borders. And in the context of the United States, someone who is seeking asylum is able to, get work authorization even if their asylum status hasn't been granted. And then they can, um, once they have that work authorization, they can continue to await that asylum decision. Once they're granted asylum, or once someone comes into this country as a refugee, that is a path to citizenship. But again, it's a path to citizenship that is long, takes a very long time. A lot of times, even once people get in under these designations, if they're a refugee, they're on a journey of about 5 years to get their green card, sort of on that path to citizenship. Right now, people seeking asylum, it can take them 5 to 7 years to have that asylum actually be granted. And then it's more time on top of that to be granted, their green card and then on their way to citizenship. So those are just three sort of definitions. The last, and there's way more, right? And I don't want to spend too
Yep.
much time talking about each distinction. If you have more questions about that, we are available to talk more in depth about these things. Um, but I also want to talk a little bit about the designation of being undocumented, because that I think is where we hear a lot in the news right now about people being deported because they are undocumented, or in the news they may use the term people are illegal aliens here illegally. And so I think it's really important from our own faith perspective to recognize that no, people are illegal.
Amen.
We recognize the dignity of all people, no matter
Yes,
how they came into this country, no matter how they migrate. And
that's
so,
right.
um, people can, be undocumented for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
I think the sort of picture people get in their mind is that, people are crossing the Sonora Desert.
Mhm.
They're climbing a wall. They're doing, doing those kinds of things. While that does happen, a lot of times people become undocumented because they overstay a tourist visa or a
Yep.
student visa
Yep.
or a work visa.
Yep.
And that is one of the main ways that people become undocumented. And I think that, another sort of thing to talk about that I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on, Brian,
Yep.
are, you know, people often wonder, like, why do so many people come to this country undocumented?
Yep.
Um, and I think that it's important for people to understand that there are very few simple, straightforward
Yes.
paths
Yep.
to come into this country with a legal status, such as a visa, such
Yep.
as refugee asylum
Yep.
status. And so would love to hear from you a little bit
Yep.
on, what is sort of the nature of immigration sort of in this context of having those limited options. It's a very
Mhm.
difficult process.
Yep.
But also I think that we also are hearing a lot right now about how all of these like criminals are invading the country.
Yep.
And I think that there's some important ways to sort of think about that, like criminality and
Yes.
migration.
Yep.
And what does that mean? So I'll let you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Grace, for bringing some clarity to what really is a very, very muddy system. And gets even muddier when frequently out in the world, folks don't do that definitional work that you just did to set some of that groundwork. And instead will just throw around some of these phrases willy-nilly.
Yeah.
And so at best, we'll hear folks just talk about immigrants without thinking about it as that huge umbrella term. At worst, we'll hear people using that term illegals to define an entire class and crop of people. And you very beautifully explained that as a people of faith, no, no one is illegal. Um, and so, allow me to step into these muddy waters and explain some of the things that make it even muddier as well, and even more difficult to be able to approach. Our Disciples Immigration Legal Counsel, Janelle Oclue, has this great video that she recorded for us where she talks about the myth of the line. We'll hear that term all the time. We'll hear that turn of phrase. Well, why can't people just get in line and do it the right way?
Yeah.
Um, and we titled it "The Myth of the Line" because there actually isn't one line. There isn't a right way per se for us to be able to come into this country. And particularly when it comes to that timeline, you explained how, yeah, refugee status can take years to achieve. To then be able to be resettled as a refugee can take years on top of that. Once you arrive in that country, it can be years before you're on the path to the things that you're going to need to be settled there. Similarly, with asylum seekers, similarly with folks who are even trying to come in on employment visas, student visas, some of those other things can be years. Family reunification, years and years and years. We're seeing folks that it's taking 2+ decades to be able to be reunited with their family members, despite the fact that that is something that we have said historically here in the United States of America, that that's something that we prioritize in our refugee resettlement system. And so to say, oh, yes, no, we just need you to get in line and do it the right way literally feels impossible because of so many of the obstacles, policy-wise, procedure-wise, that we have put up.
Mhm.
that isn't even mentioning the fact that these are typically folks that are fleeing from their home country for a reason.
Right.
Everyone would rather be home.
Yeah.
It isn't that they are coming to America because it is this great promise that they've been striving for their entire lives. That may very well be true. But every immigrant that I've ever had a conversation with, every activist that I have ever had a conversation with, has always started by saying, home is where I'd rather be, because home is home.
Yeah.
But because of all of these different situations that are happening in the world, be it famine, be it ecological disaster, be it religious persecution, be it lack of economic opportunity, be it war, any of these things that force someone to flee their home, then doesn't add up with, and we also need you to stand in this line for 20 plus years for something that may or may not even be able to grant you the kind of status that you're going to need to be
Yeah.
able to come in. So all of that gets really, really confusing and really, really muddy. And I'm going to pivot from there to the other place where some of the conversation gets really tricky, and where we frequently end up getting tripped up, especially in popular discourse out in the world, as we talk about folks that are undocumented, as we talk about folks who may be here in the country illegally. There is this distinction that exists between civil law and criminal law in this country. And again, this might sound like I'm splitting hairs, but there are really important distinctions that exist here. Um, to be in the country without documentation or proper status, we've named a couple of the ways that folks have status when they come in as immigrants to the United States. To be here without documentation or proper status is a civil offense.
Yeah.
That means that folks aren't actually going into criminal court to be tried and potentially put into prison or fined. But instead, in that civil court, they are trying to defend their right to be here in the country. They can receive a fine and then they can receive a deportation order that will send them out. But that's different than a criminal case. Criminally, there are only two things currently in the United States having to do with immigration, and both of them have to do with the ways that you enter into the country. So there's a misdemeanor that has to do with unlawful entry, which means that you entered without inspection at a port of entry. That sounds very, very technical.
Yeah.
Ports of entry can be anything from those crossings at the border, where you get to have a brief encounter and exchange with a border agent. It can be at an airport. It can be at a port where you've come in off of a boat. There are any number of places that are ports of entry where folks are inspected. Their documents are inspected, and then they are given a certain status to be able to come in. The status to be able to come in is less and less so now. We might get to that in some of our later conversations. The other criminal aspect that can be brought to this is a felony that is for unlawful re-entry, which is to say that if someone has been deported from the country to then come back in without that proper inspection is a felony charge.
Okay.
Those are very rare.
Hmm.
The immigration civil cases are the things that we hear the most of. Most of the time, when you hear about someone who is at immigration court, it has to do with that civil side of things, not with that criminal side of things. Here's one of the reasons that that becomes so important, though, is that individual protections are different on the civil side than they are on the criminal side.
Yeah.
So in criminal court, you are guaranteed the right to a lawyer who is there to defend you whether you can pay for it or not.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist in civil court,
Yeah.
which is how we end up with some of these just terrible scenarios and situations where we see like young children who are having to stand up in immigration courts and defend themselves in a language they don't even necessarily speak, without a lawyer who is there with them, without an advocate who's there with them. It's how we see some of these cases where there will be 20 or 30 folks that are all lined up one after another and just receive deportation order after deportation order after deportation order in a court case that might last 30 seconds. It's the difference between that criminal court and that civil court. Isn't just that we aren't talking about people who are possibly going to be facing jail time, but we're also talking about the ways that they're going to be interacting with that court system.
Yeah.
All of that nuance gets completely lost and thrown out the window when we simply start referring to people as illegal aliens.
Yeah.
When we aren't talking about the nuances and distinctions of folks who might have come to a port of entry and years ago were able to get in with asylum seeker status,
Yeah.
have a form of status that they are using right now, but get lumped in as, oh, you're just one of those undocumented illegal aliens who is coming into the country. When we can start to understand some of those nuances and some of those distinctions, then we can start to really think about what are some of the solutions long range that could be brought to this. What are some of the ways that we as the church could be faithfully reaching out and supporting people? What are things that can happen to help people who have fallen out of status get back into status so that
Yeah.
they then have some of the safeties and some of the protections in this country? But all of those things get completely lost
Yeah.
when it just falls into here is someone who is here illegally, and we need to get all of those people out of this country, without recognizing the humanity, the stories, the policy issues, and everything else that goes into bringing folks here in the very first place.
Absolutely. One thing that you mentioned that I want to sort of lift up related to our current context is people coming in with a status and then falling out of status, because it can be very difficult to maintain your status in ordinary times, right? Like a lot of times you need to, because you're not guaranteed a lawyer, lawyers are very expensive, and there's not enough of them, right? There's not enough immigration lawyers to really meet that need. So even in sort of normal times, quote unquote normal, related to immigration, we've needed comprehensive immigration solutions for a long time, no matter who's been president. In this time, though, I think what's important to understand is that massive groups of people who are granted temporary protected status or temporary humanitarian parole
Yep.
are losing that status sort of as a whole group. And it can be really easy to sort of look at these big numbers, like literally tens or hundreds of thousands of people from Haiti, from Venezuela, from Afghanistan, sort of who were able to get into the country because of very pressing need, like a pressing danger in their home country, all of a sudden becoming undocumented because that temporary protective status was taken away from them. And I want to share a story from I I've been going to Immigration Court Watch in Indianapolis, and recently was in one of these situations where one judge is making a lot of decisions about a lot of different people at once. It's called a master calendar hearing, and some of those people, had an attorney with them. Some of those individuals did have an attorney. Some people didn't come to their hearing, and that can be for a lot of reasons, right? Like, they maybe aren't at the address where the notice to appear was. The notice to appear is in English. Maybe they don't speak or read English. Like there's a lot of reasons. Another reason could be that they are fearful that if they show up to their appointment, they will be arrested. Because that is something that has become sort of a new norm under this administration. People who are trying to do things the right, again, the right way,
Yep.
are being arrested for doing that. In the court, sort of hearing that I was observing last week, there was a man there from Haiti, and he did not have an attorney. And when the judge asked him if he had been able to sort of get the list from the Corps of attorneys that would do things at low cost or no cost. He had not yet received that list. And again, that list is in English, and this gentleman spoke Haitian Creole. And so, one thing that people do have a right to in these hearings is interpretation into their own language. But I think it's important, and I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to witness some of these things because you can start to distinguish between, like, oh, this person is getting interpretation, they're hearing the words in their language, but there's a difference between hearing the words and
Mhm.
then having those words explained to you because
That's
a
right.
lot of this
That's right.
language is very technical. And so at one point in this hearing, the judge was asking the man, like, if we should find you removable. If we should find you removable, where should you be sent? And this gentleman was very, very clear. He couldn't return to Haiti. It wasn't safe.
Yeah.
Um, but instead of, sort of talking this man through like the implications of the decision that was before them, he was like, okay, well, I'm just going to take that as you're not designating a country
Wow.
to be removed to.
Yeah.
And then the government's attorney said, "Oh, well, we choose Haiti." And he hears that and understandably gets
Yeah.
very, very agitated and upset. He's saying, "It is not safe for me to go to Haiti. I cannot go back there." And the judge says, "Well, you didn't designate a country."
Wow.
Well, this man doesn't have a visa to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so in this gentleman's case, they did give him 1 month to find an attorney. But again, there's such a huge shortage of attorneys. And so for someone like him who has a real fear, sort of related to our conversation earlier, related to these definitions, real fear of persecution, being a victim of some sort of crime, and there's just very, very, very limited options. And I think his story is his own, and it's like playing out over and over again for so many different people right now. And so I think it's really important for us to sort of keep that in perspective. And you know, the other thing that I hear a lot about, when I say, okay, let's talk about immigration, and talk about some of these stories. Ryan, what would you say to someone who is like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that. That's too political," right? And like we're in the church, and I don't want to have this kind of political conversation. I have my own view, and I can share that in a little bit, but I would love for you to share your view first.
Yeah, thank you. It's a heavy question and it's a real
Yeah,
question. And so I do want to bring a certain level of seriousness and attention to
yeah,
it.
yeah,
It's really hard, particularly as a Christian tradition, to be able to read through our scriptures and not see that, oh my gosh, time after time after time, God calls us to be on the side of the refugee, on the side of the immigrant, on the side of the asylum seeker. The language is slightly different in
yeah,
the biblical context and in the sense, but this is it, that there are people who are no longer in the land that they had called home for whatever reason, and now they are somewhere else, and God tells us over and over and over again that we are to take care of those people because we ourselves were those people once, right?
yes, yeah,
And so to be able to bring that kind of theological frame to it, I think is important, and I
yeah,
think is a reminder for us that, oh yeah, no, that this isn't just a political issue. And I think frequently when folks talk about we don't want to talk about political issues, what they really mean is partisan issues in that way. In this way, my friend Rick Elgindy, who is a pastor at Wesley Theological Seminary, sorry, not pastor, scholar at Wesley Theological Seminary, does public theology work there, uses the phrase that I am forever partisan on behalf of the gospel.
mm,
If we're going to be partisan, don't choose a political party that you're partisan for on behalf of the church. No, be partisan for the good news of the gospel that tells us that God's love is freely given for each and every one, even you, even me, and
yeah,
that it is abundantly given for
mm,
the refugee, for the immigrant, for those who are
yeah.
outside.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, it gives us the way to be able to engage in this work. We're not doing this because we fall on one side of the aisle or the other in this kind of political language, but we're doing this because God has put this on our heart as a people of faith and as a core commitment for who we are. You've gotten me starting to preach, Grace, so I'm going to stop there and instead give you the chance to speak to the question too.
Yeah, I think that I won't say much more because I really just affirm everything that you've just said. And I but I think just going back to that distinction between like not getting political and not getting partisan is such an important one. And that like again, as you said, and I'm sorry if I already have forgotten the name of the scholar you were quoting there, but what is, I'm partisan on the part of the gospel. I think that it is important for us to remember that the gospel does have a particular point
Yes,
of view.
that's
That
right.
the gospel is, starts off by telling us the story of God inhabiting, a human body of an immigrant child who
Yes,
escaped persecution. Like
yes,
is a there's a point of view there that this is the kind of places and spaces um that God is choosing to occupy. I'm pretty soon I'm going to be preaching a sermon and I was really struck reading the text in Luke about healing the 10 lepers and one coming back to thank Jesus.
yeah.
Um, that I think is a really powerful story because the one person who comes back is described as a foreigner.
Mm,
He's the only one who comes back to thank Jesus.
yeah.
But this is the first time, sort of reading this text, that I got really stuck on that Jesus is traveling between two places. Like, it's
Wow.
very specific that, like, Jesus is inhabiting this border space,
Yeah.
and the author found it important to lift that up very intentionally. And so I think, God occupies these spaces, and it's, spaces for the church also to be in.
Yeah.
Because yes, we were sojourners. I think that's very clear. God, in many places in the Bible that we have been as a people of faith, people who have wandered, and we have been people that God has instructed to be hospitable as well. And so, and one last thing before I start preaching too much, is
Preach,
this
preach.
this idea that um in terms of how we engage in the world, politics informs like all of these different things that we do. Um so not getting bogged down in the, again, which side of the aisle are we on? Like when I talk to activists, I hear so much about how we have a bipartisan immigration problem. And yes, it is more acute now under a particular administration, but that we have not, part of the reason why things have gotten so bad is because no political party has actually proposed and enacted real solutions. And so then as people of faith, how do we interact with that system gets very complicated. But again, whatever we can do to be showing up on behalf of the people that God has called us to show up for, I think is just important.
Yeah, and this is one of the places where that folks frequently ask. I'm sure you get the question as well, Grace. Like, okay, so what can I do?
Yeah.
What can we as our church do? And like I said in my introduction, I'm the director for Justice and Advocacy Ministries. I was hired into this role with the thought process being that, oh yeah, when it comes to immigration work, you'll be helping us to interface with folks on Capitol Hill, and you'll be trying to help shape and move some of this policy. And take it from someone who has the title that I have right now. We do not have those opportunities. The current Congress that we have, the current elected officials that we have, are not interested in moving towards any of these kind of long-term solutions. Which means that as a people of faith, what's more important right now is for us to be able to find those ways and those places to engage hyper locally. And I mean at your most local level, which is something that we as people of faith and particularly churches are actually really good at and are actually really equipped for. So I think about, folks who are sitting down to have meetings with their city councilors or with their mayor and being able to say to them, listen, I'm a person of faith and I am concerned about these immigration issues because my faith tells me to do something different. I'm concerned about these immigration raids. I'm concerned about these ways that local police might be interacting with ICE agents in helpful ways. I'm concerned that they might be putting some sort of mega detention center here in our backyards. What are the ways that we can engage? What are the ways that we can talk to our neighbors to build those relationships and build that power? Write a letter to the editor or whatever online post is the version of that today. These ways that we can bring the sort of full spectrum advocacy, where it is about what are the things we can do on a local level, individual relationships, and being able to leverage the ways that our churches are active in those places and in those spaces. Does that resonate at all with you, Grace?
It does, because just to give people some context, I started this job in January of this year. And so my predecessor, a big part of the work of getting people involved and welcoming the sojourner into our nation was how can we connect churches to refugee resettlement ministry? But as many of you may have heard, it could be by the time you all are listening to this Brian and I's conversation, is we may have a new presidential determination where the president says how many refugees will be allowed into the country over the course of the next year. And right now, we're hearing rumors that it will be the lowest number, since in the history of this version of refugee resettlement. And that many of those spots are going to be reserved for white South Africans who in many ways, sort of representing kind of honestly, a perversion of what refugee resettlement was meant to do. And so necessarily like what it looks like for the church to show up for immigrants, for refugees, for asylum seekers, um, has to look different. And so definitely resonating, looking sort of zooming in very, very locally. We have people who came here with a refugee status in the last 5 years have now lost access to a lot of services that you should have been guaranteed to them by the U.S. government. And so they need support. They also need emotional support. I've heard from so many different churches that families that they've helped resettle in the last 5 years are very fearful because even though they do have, the benefit of a refugee status, who they have no idea if that status could be taken from them, if their green cards could be taken from them, or if they could be denied a green card at the end of their 5 year process. And so there are all of these ways that we can be providing support to people locally, and then attending a vigil against a new one of these mega facilities. I know that I am located in Indianapolis, Indiana, and so it used to be that in people in immigration detention were only detained in the Clay County Jail in Indiana, but now we're seeing just this week the first round of people to be detained in Miami, Indiana. And we have people being detained in Marion County, which is where I live. And so there are all these places where these injustices are occurring, where we have the opportunity to show up for our neighbors through things like court watching, through things like um, making sure that our food pantries are still accessible to our immigrant neighbors who are fearful of coming out, making sure our food pantries have culturally appropriate foods in them, so that people can still have access to things that feel like home or feel familiar. There's all these different ways, and I love meeting with churches and with congregations to talk about those ways because what would make sense in my church in Indianapolis isn't going to make sense in every church, right? And so of course, I wish there were like these like nice, easy ways that we could all solve the problem that we've been handed, or that like, Brian, you and I would be able to say, oh, like these are the sort of three easy steps that apply everywhere.
Yeah.
But I also like, sitting with people, learning their context, and then saying, and then helping brainstorm ideas, like, okay, so for you all in this particular location, in Nebraska, wherever you all find yourselves, there are ways for you guys to show up too. And so just really, um, I think, I can only speak for myself, but from what I know of you, Brian, I think we both really welcome the opportunity to help people understand their context a little better and how they can show up in that.
Yep. Absolutely. 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 It reminds me of what my mentor in ministry used to say all the time, which was that the promise of the gospel was not that it would be easy, but that it would be worth it. And that feels like a message for a time such as this, particularly as we've had this conversation. Thank you to DWM there in Nebraska. We've had this conversation where we've pointed out all of the different ways where this is really complex, all of the different ways where this is really hard to be able to step into, but also the opportunities that exist there when we do, the differences that can be made in our communities for folks who are seeking safety and shelter and security in these kinds of moments, and the ways that we as a people of faith can live out our faith honestly, truly, and with integrity in those kinds of experiences and exchanges with those folks. That all feels worth it to me, even if it's not easy.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a perfect last word. So I am a talker, and could say more, but I will let that be where we cut things off today. But yeah, so thanks for sitting down and having this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. And thank you, everyone else, for listening and be a part. Please, please, please follow up with Grace or with me or with both of us. If there are ways that we can help you with engagements, with ways that you can be thinking about this in your local congregation or in other ways that we can be supportive of you or amplifying the things that you're up to and doing too. We love being able to share the good news of what churches are doing with this as well.
Absolutely. Amen.